So data about developers, and I'd like for you to welcome Stephen O'Grady again.
Awesome. Thanks, man. All right, so this just will not work. Okay, so yeah, so we're going to go through a stats class 101. No, I'm kidding. Really, what we're here to do is to talk about sort of RedMonk Analytics, but this isn't obviously a product pitch. We don't allow other people's product pitches, so we're sure it's not going to help. Do one of our own. But basically the idea, as James said, is that when we started the company, we didn't do numbers, and largely because we just didn't think there were good numbers. So we had a lot of people, for example, come to us over the years and say, okay, I need a figure on how many running instances of MySQL there are. And our answer always was, we can't tell you that, and nobody else can either, because nobody has that data. MySQL doesn't have that data. Really nobody does. So really what we've tried to do over the last couple of years is try to identify, okay, we still can't answer that question, and still nobody can, but we can try to sort of get at and infer things, from different data sources. So, the first two talks that you heard this morning, were Matt, from Bitly and Greg from Untapped, talking about how they use the data that their services generate, right? So in other words, Bitly has 8 billion click impressions that they can sort of analyze and come to conclusions from. Greg has, what was it, Greg? 4 million plus check-ins now? 4.2 million check-ins. So the point is here is that we're in a world, where we're all generating tons of information, and this information, if we take a look at it, can actually tell us some interesting things. So, I wanted to do basically three things. Tell you go through the why, go through the what, and then we'll get into some of the examples of the data. So the why, from our perspective in terms of RedMonk Analytics is really simple. It's this. This ultimately is why we do what we do, because the sort of adoption of technologies is not reflected by what's purchased, is not reflected by what CIOs think is being used. They have basically very little to do with one another. And this is for a number of different trends. Open source has played a big role in this. Cloud has played a big role in this. Bring your own device has played a big role in this. Software as a service. We can go on and on and on. But there are a lot of different reasons today that, that top circle, so CIOs and IT managers, what they think is being used doesn't really reflect the reality. It's not, in many cases, even close. So, really, how do you get at answering that question that I talked about? How do you get at, okay, well, how many, what is the significance of MySQL? How much is there? And not specifically that question, but questions like that. Because ultimately, we're here to talk about developers. We're here to talk about the people actually implementing these technologies. How do we infer answers about their behaviors? So, we started with our data. So we built a product called RedMonk Analytics, and RedMonk Analytics basically mines our stuff. So we've been putting out content for free for almost a decade. And what we do is basically watch what people do with that content. We look for patterns, we look for trends, we look for insights. And I still remember the first time I was talking to Sun, and where's Brian Cantrell? So Brian's in the back of the room, and Brian may or may not be able to verify the fact that I talked to Sun for a long time about changing the shell in Solaris, and they just didn't want to pay attention. And ultimately, I had to come back to them with a bunch of data, from our site, with literally dozens of people showing up a day just at our site saying, change Solaris shell sucks, all these different patterns, right? And these are the kinds of things we were generating. As I say, that's one small example. This is happening dozens of times a day. So we sat back and said, well, what else is in our content? What else are we generating and just not using, right? So like I said, we started with our data, and there's a couple example charts in here. We have a geo chart, search terms, all these different kinds of things to try to basically get at, these fundamental questions. What are developers doing? Where are they coming from? What sites? What companies? That's ultimately what we created. But, we're still a small company, so we can only generate so much data. So the logical next step, was to move to other people's data. Now, the interesting thing when we started going out and talking to other people about their data is that, there's a cycle, that people go through, right? And this is, many of you in the room actually may still have yet to experience this cycle. Many of you may have been through it. But there's 3 stages that everybody goes through with respect to data. So the first is denial. Now, you go out and you talk to people, hey, you guys are generating data. There's lots of things that, you have on hand. And the first thing that everybody tells you is, no, I'm telling you, we don't have any data. There's nothing we do that's interesting. I'm sure we don't have any interesting data. I know all these other companies do, but not us. We're not generating anything interesting. And I can tell you for a fact that you're wrong. Anybody who says this is wrong. Because really, if you have any traction whatsoever, and I mean any traction, you have some insight. Even if it's just about your product, your community, your niche, you have some insight. Now, all insights aren't created equal, of course, but you have something that has value. And this is something that, we have to sort of convince people. Which leads to stage 2. Acceptance. Acceptance usually looks like this. Oh, okay, so that's right. So we make builds for 8 different operating system versions available. And we can actually tell you sort of, hard numbers, over tens of thousands of downloads, which distributions are preferred. So that's the kind of data you're talking about. Okay, yeah, all right, I accept that we have data, some. So this is the second stage. You have to get to the point, where you've gone through that denial, no, we don't have anything, I don't know what you're talking about, to this second stage that says, all right, yeah, maybe we actually have some stuff that, may be interesting. Which leads to the third stage. Once you sit down and actually talk to people about their data, about the data they're generating, and about the kinds of things you can do with it, they sit back and say, holy crap, like, I had no idea. So this is, sort of the big picture, that sets up some of the examples that we'll go through. This is a conversation. If you take one thing away from this talk, and frankly, from my perspective, you take one thing away from this conference, if you guys go home and think about the data that you have, the data that you're generating, the data that your users are generating, whatever, and think about new, interesting ways to put that to work, to inform your development, to inform, the way that you interact with your users, to inform, in many cases, your revenue strategies. That's a huge win from our perspective. But let's go through, that's all abstract, that's, sort of big picture stuff. So let's go through some examples. What are we talking about? What does this data look like? So, I know we have some people, we're the Mozilla folks. I know we have at least, okay, so you're not going to like this chart. My apologies. So I predicted last, in 2010 that in 2011, we would see Chrome eclipse Firefox's user share. And unfortunately for our friends at Mozilla, that happened. Now, to be clear, this is not representative. Our audience is very different than the normal population. 15 or 16% of our traffic is from Linux boxes. The sort of normal mainstream percentage is less than 1%. So, with the caveat that, we're talking about a very different sort of unique audience that's very developer focused, these are the kinds of things that we look at. These are the kinds of things that we pay attention to. What is the trend? Where are these things going? Because, ultimately when you see major vendors releasing products that don't support Chrome, we can go back to them and say, hey, look, we have an intensely developer-focused audience. For our audience now, that's the most popular platform. So if you're trying to reach developers and you're not supporting that platform, you may want to rethink that. So again, simple example. One of the other things we do in the RedMonk Analytics product is that we look at and rank search queries, search terms, right? So this is the default setting for the product is the past 30 days. So for the past 30 days, these are the top incoming queries to our property. So we have Mongo versus MySQL, Facebook, PHP, HipHop, Cassandra, importance of software, cloud certification. That one I was curious. I didn't really expect that. OpenShift, DynamoDB, and these are my favorites. Java is dead. Is Java dead? Facebook, Cassandra, and then, near and dear to our hearts, Monkey Grok. Exactly right. So, these are the kinds of things that we pay attention to, right? We take a look at these on a very regular basis and say, all right, well, what are developers asking us, right? Because all of you have this data. If you have a website, you have this data. People are trying to tell you something about what they want, something about what they are curious about. So we look, we monitor it. And I think Jason's there. You guys will like this chart. So this is the data. If you run the query starting in January of 2010, these are the top incoming queries. So this is 2 years plus worth of data. And the top two, obviously here, are node related. Now, we wrote a piece in 2010, I think midway through 2010, about node. And we wrote it because of things like this. Because of watching this data, node over an extended period of time literally destroys every other framework in terms of the interest that we see attracted to our properties. The queries, and there's all kinds of varieties, some of which don't make any sense. But these are the kinds of trends, these are kind of sort of data that's handed to us that we put to work. And we put it to work by drawing conclusions from that and presenting it back to users and customers. But as I said, it's not just our data, right? It's not just about what we can tell you. Because at the end of the day, what we want to be is the company that works with as much data as we can get our hands on. We will take it from people, we will scrape it, we will take data any way we can get it. And one of the ways that we get it is by working with people who are like Black Duck. So how many of you guys in the room know Black Duck? Okay, good number of you. For those of you who don't, they do source code, open source code management, governance, and so on. But among other things, they have a ton of data about open source projects, right? Because they crawl and index open source repositories. So, they have quite a bit going on. And, talking to them, they're in the position of a lot of product companies where, their job isn't necessarily to do analysis and to come to conclusions and, crunch numbers like it is for us. So, it's a partnership that actually works pretty well. They'll come to us pretty regularly and say, hey, we have this data, what do you think? Anything in here? And, a couple things. First of all, this slide obviously is the rise of GitHub. You may have seen this on the blog this year. And basically, all I've done here is take the commit volume, and this is for, if I remember right, I think this is commits for the first half of 2011. So the first 2 quarters worth of data. Just total commits across, these 4 forges. And I've ranked them here by age to sort of point out that GitHub's popularity, overwhelming popularity, is really truly a phenomenon. And something, again, sort of worth noting, worth observing, and for all of you in the room, worth understanding and targeting and adjusting to, which is certainly what we see in practice. Those of you in the room who are JavaScript people will probably like this chart. This is also from Black Duck data. It's a different data set. So they gave us a snapshot from their all-time commits, and they gave us a snapshot from, I can't even read it, I think it's March 2011. And all we did was basically compare the changes in volume, right, the changes in percentage. And ultimately what we found was something that we have been arguing about and for a long time. I can remember 3 or 4 years ago when the big analyst firms came out and said, hey, it's okay to use dynamic languages. And we're saying, all right, doesn't matter if it's okay or not, they've been used by everybody for a decade. That sort of claim on our part is now backed up by the data that we see, which is basically that the dynamic languages are gaining in terms of their overall commits. Right? So again, these are the kinds of things that we can do with data. This one, unfortunately, Chris Tacey isn't here today. Chris Tacey is a guy who works for AppFog. Very good guy, CB Tacey on Twitter. He actually put this analysis together. I thought it was brilliant. And ultimately what he did was get some data from the National Venture Capital Association and UNH Center for Venture Research and chart deal volume against deal size. And can anybody guess sort of the impetus for this decoupling? I know there's at least 2 or 3 people in the room who are going to know what this is immediately. The question is, will they raise their hand? In the back. Exactly. Why? Good guess. Cloud? Amazon. Okay. So, what you see from the data is that the decoupling kind of begins 2006, 2007. And if you recall, that is around the time that Amazon launched EC2. They launched EC2 and S3 both. I think S3 launched in March of 06. EC2 launched in August of 06, I believe. So, with all sort of due respect to our cloud friends in the room, who certainly played a role in this, there is certainly evidence to suggest that that market in 2006, has had a profound, sort of sustained impact on the number and volume of venture deals, as well as sort of the typical funding. So whoever it was in the room said that this is a matter of the cost of startups going down. That is absolutely correct, and particularly at the sort of early part of 2000s, when I was a systems integrator doing work with startups, the bills that you would have to pay to start a bit, it was obscene. And these days, you can start businesses really on a song. So again, these are some of the kinds of sort of interesting conclusions you can come to, when you sit back and take a look at data that people have generated. This one I thought was interesting. Among the sort of data sources that we track internally are LinkedIn groups. So, what we did, what's the time frame here? So this is just, basically 2 months worth of data. And, we sort of run the numbers and say, all right, what's the growth look like, for these, LinkedIn groups? And again, this isn't hugely representative. It's certainly not a canonical data source, but, when we see a pattern in a number of different disparate data sources, you can begin to infer things from that larger pattern. But amongst the LinkedIn data, these were the communities that showed the highest growth. And we track, I can't remember what it was, like 75 or 80, different technology groups. So, OpenShift, Cloud Foundry, Play Framework, Redis, and Git were all way, way up. And do we have any WebOS people in the room? Okay, that's good. All right, so the bad news for WebOS is that they were one of 2 groups that actually declined. They had I think 0.2 or 0.5 % decline in terms of their overall LinkedIn group membership. So again, just another data source that will give you insights in terms of community growth, community behaviors, and so on. So this one I thought was interesting. You can all go to the GitHub page right now and sort of look this up. This will tell you exactly what the most popular languages are on GitHub. All right. So, okay, fine. Who cares? I can look this up myself. The difference is that we record this every month, and what we end up doing is comparing snapshots by time to say, okay, well, this is great. This is the list now. What's changed? How does it compare to a month ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago? All right? This is one of the things that we do. So when we looked at the data and compared it, what was this? This is like a quarter. These were the highest growth languages in terms of the ones who jumped the most spots on the popularity contest. And I thought it was, Brian's going to be pissed about this. Brian, do you see the number 1? Is it going to trigger your nerd rage? Yeah, I got a shaking head. I won't even mention the number 1 spot then, for fear of triggering said nerd rage. I find it very interesting, however, that one of the highest gaining languages was Java, in fact. So you can see, some of the others, Prolog, MATLAB. I wouldn't have figured that. But there you go. And as I'm about to get the hook, I'm done, as a matter of fact.
You are done.
I'm done. Last slide.
Awesome.
So data's your friend.